started. You guys are ready? My own team back there won't even let me start.
Hey, manifestors.
Yeah, we're rolling.
Clock's running.
Hey, we're from Manifest. I'm Benji. This is Gordon. We proposed this session not really thinking we were going to get it, but here we are. So, got a little agenda here.
It's not on the screen.
Yeah.
There
awesome.
There we go.
That's been happening to a lot of people. So.
Really?
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's okay. So, I'm going to kind of give you a backstory of what we did as far as converting these modules. Get into blocks, pages, forms, JavaScript, and then I'm sure there will be questions. So we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. So basically what we had to do was take a Drupal 7 site that was acting like 6 and port it to 6 Drupal 8 sites. And we were given 3 months to do it. The site didn't actually use domain or anything that you would normally use to make a single install look like 6 sites. It used taxonomy and a bunch of crazy custom code. And on top of that, we had 2 subdirectory sites, which made things interesting as well. Got anything added to that? I mean, that you can say out loud?
I could actually comment forever on this.
Yeah. It was pretty hard to work with because we inherited this site. And you would read code and be like, I don't even know why this works or if it's working. And yeah, I guess that's all we'll say about
We spend as much time being what I like to call archaeologists as anything else, diving into someone else's code. I'm sure no one in here has ever had that experience before. So yeah, it's not only simply just taking something and porting it to a new platform, it's trying to understand why. And of course, the team that we had to work with on the other end, the content entry people, couldn't tell us why some functionality existed or not, or whether it was needed in the new site. There was a lot of legacy systems. And I don't know how much you guys know about what best practice for Aqua used to say. I think it was 20 modules, 40 modules maybe is best for their platform. We had 80 custom modules that was on top of the contrib modules that had everything under the sun.
Right. Like node types were being...
Including organic groups, and there was clearly no organic groups in the site, but we had it. But we didn't want to turn it off because we weren't really sure
right.
where else that would manifest itself.
So, has anybody done this yet? Ported from D7 to D8? Well, yeah, of course, Alex. Matt. So this is just kind of give you guys an idea of what the file structure looks like. And these are both the same module. It's a, this is a module that pulls data from Google to create a trending content block. It shows the 4 highest trending articles on the site. And as you can see, they're slightly different. Everything's kind of split out into more forms now, and we'll get into that. But first thing you want to do when you're starting is this. Awesome.
Wait for the screen to refresh.
I think the solution's been to turn the resolution down a little.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, we'll just deal with it as long as you guys don't mind. Is start with a .info file, which you have to do in D7, D8, D6 if you ever had to do that. But in D8, it's become a YAML file, and which stands for yet another markup language, as I know most of you already know. And you still need a .module file, but it technically doesn't do anything. I mean, you can put functions in it if you want to, but you don't have to. So just to give you an idea of what that .info looks like, it's pretty similar. Syntax is important. The spaces, if you get the spaces wrong, you're basically looking at a white screen site. And you don't get any good error message that really tells you where it is, what's happened, what line it is. You kind of just have to walk through the file until you figure it out. And as you can see, pretty similar. You have the same things. You don't list your files anymore. All right. Blue screen again. I didn't even change that time. Okay. Blocks. Gordon and I were talking earlier, and really the only D7 hooks that we've ever used are hookblock info and hookblock view. Has anybody ever used any of the other ones?
Pre-save.
The save?
Pre-save.
Pre-save. That's a thing?
Okay.
I think I've used the alter ones before.
Yeah. Configure, that's when you're doing configuration forms and stuff like that. Probably. I don't know. Yeah. I've never used
I mean, I've seen it. I've just not had to write
yeah,
it.
yeah. And as you can see on the right side is what you're looking at in Drupal 8, and that lives in a controller or a plugin. Is it a plugin?
It's a plugin. Source
It's a
plugin block.
Yeah, I could have seen that right there in the first line. And these, you got to declare the namespace, and it's usually Drupal, your module name, plugin block, and you need these. What are those even called? The U's.
Dependency injection.
Okay, dependency injection. As you can tell, I'm really great at this stuff. Or it just won't work, as I found out. And then when the annotation is basically like your hookblock info, where you give it an ID, the admin label, and the admin category. And then you have a class that's basically the name of your file and extends the block base. And then you have a build function with an array inside it. So I hope you guys can see this. On the right, or on the left, I'm sorry, is your Drupal 7 hookblock info. And then on the right is what that looks like in your plugin.
So here again, the annotation, the part of the comments is the syntax is particular. It's another way. It's each item has to be on its own line. It's to end with a comma. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to get it to appear. Like in this particular instance, this is how it shows up in the block list when you go to we go to place the block on the page.
So if anybody has any questions, just jump in with them. We don't have to wait till the end. And this is basically, this is that same module I was talking about that creates the trending block. So this is hookblock view. It's calling in a custom callback or a custom function that actually builds the block. And then in Drupal 8, inside your build function, it's basically doing the same thing, but in this case, I decided to actually render it with the view mode so that the original module just had a template and it printed the values in the template. So things like that are a lot easier in Drupal 8 as far as like, getting things to the page. At least I think so. I don't know. What do you think? Yes?
6.5 doesn't it? Depends.
Yeah, I guess.
Your level of comfortability.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't like Twig, if you do like Twig.
Yeah, Twig, I don't know. I like it. It's a lot easier than...
I like it a lot better than PHP template.
Yeah.
It's just me.
So pages. In D7, you used hook menu and you usually used a custom callback to get things to the page. In D8, you have a routing file that creates the path. You have a controller, which is basically your page. If you want to add something to a menu, you also do that with YAML, or if you want to add something to the local task, you do that with the YAML file as well. And Gordon's going to go over the deriver thing because I still don't understand it. So.
Oh yeah, it's got its own slide. Okay, I'm trying to think of in D7 in your hook menu. If you had, say, a collection of items that were dynamic, you wanted to create local tasks, a menu type of local task. The equivalent is you'd run a for each statement and run through a list of items to be able to dynamically create these things on the menu. In D8, you use a deriver function. In the YAML file, you specify the name of the deriver. And then in here, now this particular example, it's not really doing anything dynamic. This is just kind of illustrative. But in here, same thing. We have for each statement at the bottom that would dynamically create the items for the local tasks in the particular site we were using. We were building this for.
This is actually something that, part of a module that creates HTML emails that we just email to the client so they can drop it into their email system.
Yeah, the content admins, they go in, they create this. This is not exposed to outside users. This is simply for content admins. They come in, they throw a bunch of articles into a node so that it pulls in teasers. Then they want to save it out and purely grab the HTML and they throw it into whatever their email is, MailChimp, whatever it is. It's already rendered HTML, so it's basically a tool for them to be able to blast out emails without us having to interact with the system through their API. This was kind of business rules driven. It's not how we would have intended to build that tool set.
Right. But which a lot of the things we did on this site were that way. So, as I said before, in your .module file, this is hook menu, where you have the items array and you give the page a title, usually have a custom callback, and in this case it's in a file, and the menu callback, what was it you said before?
Yeah, menu callback is simply, it's a callback for a menu item.
So
it's not menu nor line. It's you're specifying, you're creating a path. Okay, the menu system knows that this path exists. You can't then go to the menu system and create the same path. It's blocking it out, throwing it into the DB so it can't be used. It's defining a static, not necessarily static, but instantiated callback.
So,
you're mapping a function to a path. Let's put it that way.
So basically, that's what you're doing here with this YAML file. You're giving the page a path. You're not. If you wanted to do the menu thing, you would do that in the menu YAML, the menu link YAML. But you're telling it which controller to use and giving it a title and giving it permissions right here in this YAML. So this is the return array from that custom callback in Drupal 7. And as you can see, it's doing quite a few things here. It's attaching CSS, JavaScript. It's doing some settings for the JavaScript itself. Has anybody ever messed with that? I recently just learned how to do this. I didn't even know it was a thing until I was working on a project and had to do it. So basically, you can create things in PHP that can be passed to your JavaScript files. So that's what this states data thing is here. Whoa. Just in case that wasn't large enough for you guys. Did I skip something?
You did.
Oh, okay. That's what happened.
You swiped left.
So this is basically the same thing in Drupal 8. It hasn't changed too much. The only thing that really has changed is now, and we'll get into this later, we are calling the JavaScript and CSS in with a library, as you can see on the first thing in the attached array. So forms, we've all done them, right? Altered them. I think I've used all of these in Drupal 7. They really haven't changed too much in Drupal 8. Some of the function names are different. They, of course, are in their own file. As you can see, that source form name. And then the form name extends the form base class. And then within that class, you usually hit all of these functions here. And this is slightly different. This is still a routing file, but for a form, you under the defaults, you actually have a path to your form. And you usually want a permission that's a little stronger than access content, because you don't really want everybody touching your forms, especially when they will determine whether your trending blocks work or not. So as you can, this is Drupal 7. Everybody's done forms. Arrays, just like everything else is in Drupal. And if you look at the Drupal 8 version, it really hasn't changed much at all, really. There's maybe one line that's different. And if you look, our next slide, this is just kind of an aside. Variables aren't a thing anymore in Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, you would use variable get and variable set to get and set your variables. But as you can see on the right side for Drupal 8, it's changed a bit, and they all now live, there's no more variable table either. They now live in config, we think, right? Yeah, they do. We were just looking for it earlier, and we couldn't remember if they actually lived in code or in the table, and we found it in the table. So they're kind of hard to find, but they're there. So JavaScript. I didn't have to do much JavaScript in Drupal 7 other than get it to the page. And it was actually pretty easy. There were several different ways to do it. You could just declare the scripts in your info file. You could use Drupal add.js. You could attach them in an array. And you could use libraries. Has anybody ever done that in Drupal 7? I've never tried it, other than installing a module.
Of course Matt has.
Yeah. Because he's nerdy and socially awkward. So in Drupal 8, they pretty much, you're using libraries. There's not really a choice. And you can either put them in your module file. There's a module YAML or a theme YAML. In a theme, you can actually add them to your .info file, but in a module, you need to attach them some way. So this is kind of what a library looks like in Drupal 8. So you can, in most cases, I think it throws things in the footer now, right?
By default, yes. Footer.
So if you need it in the header, you have to tell it, hey, I need this in the header, by just putting header true there. You can include files that live in your module or theme, and you can set dependencies for those. You can also hit external scripts. I didn't put an example in here, but I had to actually do one as the value of a div, and that was just ugly, so I didn't put it in here. And I don't want people doing that, but it's the only way it would work. So yeah, in .info, this is pretty much all you had to do, and it would just include them in Drupal 7. But in a theme, this is how you do it in Drupal 8. So you just add libraries, and then point at the library that you've named in the YAML file. And when I was doing this, I noticed this. I didn't notice it when we were building the site, but you can actually remove CSS files. I'm guessing, Alex, you put that in there? Yeah. It's pretty cool. Because usually you had to, didn't you have to write something and pre-process HTML and rip everything out of the scripts array and then...
I thought you had to redeclare the same one, but it was empty.
Yeah. Good times.
That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. So this is basically the same, a couple ways you can add these. you can either use Drupal add JS or in a return array, add them to the attached array. This was in D7. And as you see in that Drupal add JS example, they actually had different scripts for different environments. Not sure why. So this is basically, this hasn't changed much, other than there's actually stuff. There we go. So basically you're attaching the libraries now instead of actual files. Whoops. Questions? I told you it wasn't going to be long.
Come on, there's got to be a question.
All right, you got enough time you can redo it?
Yeah, we could do. Let's go back to the top.
Do you remember to set the record?
Yeah, it's recorded.
So my favorite thing here is the hook page attachments. When you're specifying libraries, libraries aren't just simply about, like in the past you had to put JS and CSS on the page in two different commands. Libraries, you specify in a library, you can specify CSS and JS in the same library and just get them both on the page with one fell swoop. That's what I like about it. It's so much cleaner that way.
Yeah.
As a back-end guy, I don't want to type that much. I mean, the front-end guys,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, I don't want to have to copy too much from Stack Exchange.
We just like put on a recording that we sound like the two of the laziest people in the world, but we like to think of it as efficient, not lazy.
Yeah.
That's how you get more done then.
That's right. See, we got through this presentation so efficiently, there's time for questions.
What did you find that you had to redo in the interiors of the module? Not just because they were lousily coded in the first place, but because of changes in Drupal.
Now, first up, because this is being recorded and the developer may be in the room, we didn't say it was coded in a lousy way. Just saying. No. The biggest problem we really had was functionality and what was determined to be needed or not needed, and there was a lot of lack of knowledge.
So the inherent problems were from the design, not from the migration.
Well, a lot of things we were able to do with out-of-the-box things with Drupal. And then some of the things, like Gordon said, lack of knowledge. People didn't know how things were actually created. So we're like 2 weeks out from launch and we're finding pages that are created in a module and using JavaScript that we didn't know about. And then, figuring out, oh, how do I get this to the page? This is how I used to do it. So like having to learn this, or one of the modules, like the CSS was playing a really major part, so nothing was actually working because the CSS was it was a map and it was coming in like about that big because it wasn't reading any of the CSS rules that it needed. And I figured it out when I added it to the library, and all of a sudden the map's like... So there were things like that. The variables and configuration, like finding the right syntax to do all that stuff. That's the thing with, like, Drupal 7 has really good documentation because it's been around forever. And Drupal 8, not so much. Like, you would find one instance that got you exactly what you needed. Whereas with 7, like, you Google something and the whole first page will give you 10 different ways to do something.
This site we inherited, the original architect was actually a very sharp programmer. I don't think that Drupal was his first love, but the reason there was 80 custom modules, he wanted all of the module creation or the content type creation to live in code and in version control. So it wasn't in the database. He didn't go and create an article content type and then put all the fields on it. And to get it in code, he had custom written, some instantiation rules to be able to create it. When you enable that module, it's got a new content type, and that content type has all those fields and stuff like that. So all that stuff was what we like to call cruft, that because we went to D8, we put all that stuff, built it through the UI or through the migrate module, and then we jumped it into the YAML files. We didn't have to worry about it again until we wanted to add a new field to one of those content types. So that got rid of a lot of custom modules. We went from 80 down to like 10. I think we're down to 10 right now. And like he said, we got a lot of our functionality out of contrib modules that had come a long way. Now, we started talking to the client about making this migration over a year ago. A year ago, a lot of those modules hadn't been ported to D8 yet. And that was a significant help, that the community was able to do that in the year. Because if we had been on the hook to do a lot of that stuff, we would have had to go on the original route the original developer went, was to create a lot of custom modules, or we would have had to get into all of those contrib modules and work on porting those. And that's a serious undertaking, too, that we weren't staffed for.
We did have to write some custom migrations, too.
Yeah, we did. We had to convert field collections to paragraphs. And so there was a patch that existed to be able to do some of it. So we had to patch the module, and then we had to write some custom migration scripts to be able to get stuff out of field collections and into the paragraph. And that was kind of a trial and error sort of thing. I think I had to run that importer like a dozen times.
We ran it a few times.
So having the YAML files got us out of a lot of that overhead. Going from 6 sites living on a single Drupal instance to actually making them 6 discrete sites in a multi-site environment opened up the pipeline to the database. From the code base to the database was no longer this big. It was now this big because each site was talking to its own database. We had a lot of speed increases, just like our SEO team was pretty happy with the performance of the site, because that used to be a big problem. Certain pages were taking 30 seconds to load. Ridiculous stuff like that.
A lot of the custom code, too, was just dealing with the way they built them, the multi-site, too. Because there were, entire files that were looking at the URL and saying, if it's this URL, do this. So we got rid of a lot of that stuff, too.
I think we were talking about this before, because 2 of the sites exist as subdirectory sites, Drupal in a subdirectory. They were symlinking to the parent directory. So if you did an inspection or tried to load something, in Drupal's eyes, it wasn't 80 modules, it was 320 or something like that, because it was, when it was trying to think about something, it was going through all the directories and finding it. Each instance of it because of the symlinks. So, yeah, that was not pleasant. So that was at the top of the list, I think, for goals for the project in general. We actually proposed this originally as a case study, more so as how to port a module. So these were a lot of the things that we were going to talk about. Glad I had some time to get it in there. It was a learning experience.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Obviously, re-architecting isn't something that you can automate, but is any of this stuff that could go in the scripting, module conversion scripting, and things like that? There's a 7 to 8 converter that you just run, and it handles some of the file changes
that's a
and things like that.
good question.
I don't know if the way they were built, if it would be possible, because they weren't really built like Drupal.
I'm not talking about doing your whole setup, but are there pieces that you've learned that maybe could go into the scripting so that other people wouldn't have as much to do?
That's possible. I don't think I could answer that question on the spot. I'd have to think about it.
I mean, I think if I were going to have to do a whole bunch of this, I mean, it would depend on what the modules look like, but I would definitely use console to scaffold the new modules, just to take care of just the folder and kind of keep me honest with my typos. And so, I mean, that would automate some of it for you. You'd still have to slog through everything.
I'm just looking at getting more sites to be able to go over to D8, and part of it is converting modules. And if you can get somebody that likes to just run the script and do a few things that they know and get it set up so that other people can come in and handle more of the detail, that might help out.
Console would help you.
Yeah.
And the example module has a lot of stuff you can steal.
Well, like I said, if you're going to re-architect it, because there's a whole bunch of changes, obviously that's almost impossible to automate because that's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah,
but some of the things that, like the variables,
Right.
I don't know how much that script does that, but
Yeah, I don't know either.
that would be something that would be fair. Should be fairly easy.
Because I usually pull them from the example module, and in a lot of cases we were trying to change it because we didn't have to deal with 6 sites on one. Because I feel like in some cases the modules themselves got a lot smaller too.
They did. I mean, I'm sure no one's had this problem where you've been giving an insurmountable task with extremely tight turnaround time.
Nobody ever.
And this was not the case. There was plenty of times where we were maybe following the previous architecture out the window. We wanted to do it differently, but maybe to meet a particular deadline, we say, okay, this is working for now. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We'll address it later because after the initial launch, of course, there's going to be a maintenance window, for us to do stuff. Because, I mean, right now, so this launched about a month ago. We're out of the woods with bug fixes. We're doing feature enhancements now.
Yeah.
But a lot of these things, the account team now is really excited because of all the speed increases and stuff like this. They're now at a point where they can say, hey, go back to the client and say, there's a lot of these features that we would like to implement, which were not a possibility before in D7 with the kind of load times we're talking about or the overhead that the site had. So we're in a better place now, and that was kind of the first step on the journey, was to be able to do that. Young man?
Ultimately, from D7 to D8, how much of the fat was trimmed? And you said you brought down the number of custom modules from 80 to 10.
That was mostly through re-architecting, right?
Yeah, because we had all these other, we were able to put a lot of stuff in YAML, and I think we didn't talk about this, but the YAML, the config site we have for the site, because there's 6 or 7 sites, we have 6 or 7 config directories living, and that was a little bit of a problem. And during development, we had so many developers in there that we had a little bit of regression occasionally because somebody was pulling in the wrong YAML file or something like that. But
Everybody did it at least once, I think.
Yeah. You get to the point where you're not going to each site and exporting the config. You're exporting it one time, and then you're copying and pasting it into all these different directories, and then certain of those things actually have the theme in them. And that was a lesson learned by some of the devs that, I just caused the entire thing to not be able to run config import because that theme is not enabled on this particular site. So it's there were some learning lessons there too. But to answer your question, I don't have a hard number about how much fat was trimmed. But if you want to say like certain pages were taking 20 to 30 seconds to load, and we're now down to like 2.5 seconds per page, and this is kind of a coffee table book version of sites. They're like 4 and 5 megs per page. A lot of imagery, a lot of high-res imagery. So we feel like that's a huge win in terms of performance.
And a lot of them we were able to consolidate too. They had probably 4 or 5 modules that were just doing JavaScript. So I was able to put a bunch of those in the same module.
And they had a lot of analytics. I mean, there was probably 4 different reportings going on for each site. I think we got it down to 2 now. Is it 2 or 3?
I'm not sure. Yeah,
there again, there was a shortcoming in knowledge from the different teams about what are we actually still collecting on. Do we need this?
Yeah, we had probably 20, 30 scripts that didn't need to be there. So.
Yeah, and in D7 they were loading in the head,
Right.
So now we have them predominantly loading in the footer, except for Google Analytics always wants you to have.
And the ads that are no longer on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll come back on.
Yeah, they better. I spent a lot of time making those work.
Here's another 10 seconds.
All right, well, I guess, as we say at my company, we can give you back 20 minutes of your day. It's a win-win. Thanks for coming.